to participants joining from Romania, Indonesia, and beyond. I'm happy to welcome you on today's webinar titled Romania in EU, Indonesia and ASEAN, with promoters within the EU-ASEAN Strategic Partnership. This webinar is jointly held by the Habibie Center and the Romanian Institute for European Asia Studies, or IRSEA, in commemoration of the 55th anniversary of ASEAN. My name is Mabda, a researcher at the Habibie Center, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Before I proceed with the introduction, please allow me to note several housekeeping rules for today's session. Today's webinar will begin with brief statements from students and scholars representing 6 different universities and institutions from Romania and Indonesia. Then we'll proceed with presentations by 2 of the distinguished speakers and a sharing session at the end of the session. We would like to respectfully request all participants to ensure that their microphones are muted during the presentations. We welcome comments and questions from participants on Zoom and from those tuning in from YouTube. Participants on Zoom will be given opportunities to directly raise their questions during the sharing session, while participants on YouTube are welcome to use the chat box feature to type in their questions. By way of introduction, we are very pleased to welcome 2 distinguished keynote speakers from both Romania and Indonesia, His Excellency Minister Leonard Orban and Sofwan Albanakhurizat, PhD, who will present their views on Romania and Indonesia's roles within their respective regions. It is also an honor to welcome more than 30 bright Romanian and Indonesian young scholars joining us on Zoom. Despite their geographical distance, Romania and Indonesia share similar interests in expanding their bilateral relations and upholding their responsibilities and roles in the EU and ASEAN, as well as enhancing EU-ASEAN strategic partnership. Today's webinar serves as a platform to appreciate these common interests through people-to-people knowledge exchange. Without further ado, I would like to call Dr. Nick Floria to introduce our first keynote speakers. Dr. Floria, over to you.
Hey, thank you very much, Mabda. Distinguished Professor and former Minister Orban, Professor Khoirizad, Executive Director of the Habibie Center, President and founder of IRSEA, professors from Indonesia and Romania, dear colleagues, students, and friends. It gives me a great pleasure to be here with you today, taking part at the IRSEA THC webinar organized on the occasion of ASEAN's 55th anniversary. For those of you who do not know us yet, IRSEA is the oldest independent, autonomous, not-for-profit think tank in Romania to exclusively focus on ASEAN affairs. I'm working for consolidating the robust Europe-Asia interaction. Since 2009, our institute has been a member of the European Alliance for Asian Studies, and since last year, IRSEA has become part of the Euromesco think tank network. We value the partnership of almost 40 think tanks and institutions in Europe and Asia. THC has been our partner since 2008, and we are proud of having recently renewed our cooperation framework. Long story short, our work at IRSEA aims at bringing Asia closer to Europe and Europe closer to Asia. I believe we will all agree when I say this is also the ultimate purpose of our event today. Certainly, it is a particular honor for me to introduce His Excellency Minister Leonard Orban. When it comes to my country's accession to the European Union, it is hard to think of someone who is more involved in the complex negotiation and accession process than Minister Orban. Romania's former chief negotiator with the European Union, subsequently Minister of European Affairs and Presidential Advisor on EU Affairs, His Excellency Minister Orban has been my country's first commissioner, that is, Romania's first member of the European Commission. I'm sure we all agree I do not exaggerate at all when I say it is hard to think of anyone else as familiar with Romania's role in the European Union as Minister Orban. Currently an associate professor with the Romanian American University in Bucharest, Minister Orban is imparting his vast experience and expertise with professionals, scholars, and students alike, continuing to promote Romania's closer European integration and a more cohesive European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Furia. This webinar is also organized by the Habibie Center, founded by the third President of Indonesia, Baharudin Yusuf Habibie, and his family, as an independent, non-governmental, and non-profit think tank. The center envisions to advance democratization efforts in Indonesia in pursuit of realizing a democratic society which acknowledges and respects human rights. In upholding Indonesia's free and active foreign policy principle, the Habibie Center shares IRSEA's keen interest in supporting people-to-people exchanges between people in Southeast Asia and beyond, including Europe. I am also honored to introduce Sofwan Albana Khairizat, PhD. Dr. Khairizat is one of the most active scholars in Indonesia, whose works have immensely contributed to advancing our knowledge on ASEAN and Indonesian foreign policy. He is currently an associate professor, lecturer, and the manager of the Research, Publication, and Social Service Unit at the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, the University of Indonesia, as well as an associate fellow at the Habibie Center. He has published multiple publications on ASEAN and Indonesian foreign policy, including a book titled in bahasa ASEAN di Persimpangan Sejarah, Politik Global, Demokrasi, dan Integrasi Ekonomi, which translates to ASEAN at the intersection of history, global politics, democracy, and economic integration. To begin today's discussion, allow me to call representatives from students joining from Zoom to briefly share their personal views, with Romanian students addressing their perceptions on ASEAN and Indonesian students sharing their opinions on the EU. Each representative is given 1 minute to introduce their names, institutions, and share a brief statement on their views. To the representative from the Faculty of International Economic Relations, Bucharest University of Economic Studies, could you please use the raise hand feature and we will put the spotlight on you, please? Okay, great. Thank you, Alexandra. Please, the time is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. My name is Alexandra Radu, and I am pursuing a master's degree in diplomacy in international economy at the Bucharest University of Economic Studies, which is the leader of economic and public administration, higher education in Romania and Southeastern Europe. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for being here today. It is an honor for me to speak in front of so many people, and I think this is a great chance to get closer to each other through the common interest we share. While ASEAN is a representative association of Southeast Asia, promoting economic growth and respectively social progress and cultural development, but also maintaining peace, which is the essence of ASEAN community. The EU, on the other hand, is a supranational union comprising 27 European countries and governing common economic, social, and security policies. Being dialogue partners for 45 years, on the 1st of December 2020, European Union and ASEAN started a new chapter as strategic partners. Therefore, in the light of the excellent relationship between Romania and Indonesia established in 1950 and the partnership between EU and ASEAN, our university is glad to take part in this event meant to bring together Asia and Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I would like to welcome a representative from the Center for International Cooperation and Development Studies, Faculty of Political Science, Bucharest University, to share their views. Please, you may use the raise hand feature and you may take the screen. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm the director of the Research Center, Center for International Cooperation and Development Studies at the University of Bucharest, Faculty of Political Science. And I'm very happy to see also Nick Flora here, who I think is our graduate from our faculty. And I'm here with our students from several programs, but most importantly from a course on politics and governance in Asia and Australasia. The only one in Romania is the third year when we are having this course, and we're really looking forward to this event to exchange views not only on EU-ASEAN affairs in principle, but also on how we can collaborate further, because ultimately both EU and ASEAN mean nothing without grassroots cooperation and also academic exchanging ideas about human rights, about progress, and about development. So we're looking forward to have this opportunity to first hear each other, listen to each other, and to find ideas on what we could do further from Romania and from Indonesia for our common goals. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussions.
Thank you. And lastly, from the Romanian side, we also have a representative from the Faculty of Theology, Letters, History, and Arts from the University of Pitești. Please, you may use the raise hand feature and start to share your statement. Is there anyone from the University of Pitești? Okay, Bianca, please. Sorry, I think you still have your microphone. Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I'm in my second year at the university. I study history here. I'm so excited to be in this meet, and I'm pretty anxious to talk about it because it's my first time in this project, but I found it really interesting, and that's why I thought of joining it. Our teacher recommended this to us, and I was really excited because I'm really interested into Southeast Asian countries. And I found it very interesting because we share similar things and we have common things and common goals. And that's really incredible for me. And that's why I think this meet has an impact. And I'm looking forward to see what is happening here. Thank you so much.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you. And those are the views from the Romanian students joining us today. Next, I would like to call the representatives from Indonesia. The first one being the representative from the School of Strategic and Global Studies, University of Indonesia. Please again use your raise hand feature and introduce your name and your view briefly.
Coba urgent. Bine. Okay.
Ibu Heni?
Oh, okay, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, that's okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be a representative from University of Indonesia for IRC THC webinar. I would like to thank you for Professor Anka Eli, Professor Luciana Alexander, and Professor Konstantin that taking time off from your busy schedule to attend this important event. As well, all know, the international relation between ASEAN and European Union has been going continuously. The relation to negotiations is not only based on economic interests, but have also expanded toward political and security issues. There have been multiple forms of strategic cooperation that were conducted in order to maintain the stability and peace in each region. The most recent is the implementation of ASEAN and European Union Comprehensive Air Transport Agreement, or CATA, on this Monday, which is become the first inter-regional air relations agreement in the world. And the other side, to align with the core topic of today's discussion, I would like to elaborate the bilateral cooperation between Romania and Indonesia, and then the great diplomatic relations between both countries began with Romania's recognition of Indonesian independence of Republic Indonesia in 1950s, and then 10 years later, the first president of Republic Indonesia, Mr. Sukarno, made his first state visit of Romania. During the visit, President Sukarno and Mr. George Murer, Romanian head of state at the time, signed a joint statement on bilateral relations between two countries. On the same side, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the two countries, Dr. Subandrio from Indonesia and Mr. Abraham Bunasiu, signed the bilateral agreement on cultural cooperation, which was the first cooperation agreement and become the basis for the development of bilateral cooperation between Indonesia and Romania. Meanwhile, in economic sector, I see, especially on the trade side of the two countries, indicates a surplus for Indonesia and Romania. In social cultural sector, bilateral relations between two countries have been going well, and people-to-people contact still has been a potential to be developed. Multiple cooperation between Indonesia and Romania has been conducted, such as cooperation between universities. Both countries is under the umbrella of MOU, which aims to increase contact between the two countries. For instance, Dharma Siswa Scholarship Program and Indonesia Cultural Scholarship for participants from Romania to join in Indonesia and studying about the cultural tradition and art of Indonesia, and also about the humanitarian assistance from government and people of Romania after 2004, especially Aceh earthquake and tsunami. And the last thing that although the cooperation between Republic of Indonesia and Romania has been going well, there are several projects that could be developed. In terms of economy, the wonderful tourism that both Indonesia and Romania have can be improved through cooperation. In addition, the location of Indonesia capital city to East Kalimantan can offer many opportunities for foreign investors, including the Romanians, in various sectors such as IT, the financial services, and green projects. So that I assess this webinar is the initiative to build a strong relation both countries in all of the sectors. That's all I want to emphasize this afternoon. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Then we also have a student to represent the International Relations Department from the Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University in Jakarta to present their view. Please, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, host. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, thank you for everybody joining the conference today. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, or even good evening to everybody joining the conference today. I'm honored to be the representative from my institution for this conference. So before, let me introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Mirza Fahri from State Islamic University of Syarif Hidayatullah, Jakarta, from Faculty of Political and Social Science and majoring in International Relations Studies. Okay, it's also quite unique and interesting when we see a conference between countries whose locations are on the other side of the world, just like Indonesia and Romania. We can call this conference as when the East greets the West, you know. Okay, then moving on to one of our topics today is I want to talk about the European Union. So the history on the development of European Union is such a sight to behold. The institution integration process has enjoyed 5 decades of success since its early days in the 1950s. The European Union went from a mere, air quotes, coal and steel community, and now are a full economic political union and also a major institution in Europe or even the world. So what I want to talk about is the European Union principles on the concept of intervention. While the European Union has the right to intervene on its member country through measures like suspend certain rights from member states, which procedures are written on Article 7 of the Treaty on European Union, ASEAN, on the other hand, have no ability to intervene at all. The principles of non-intervention are sternly written at the ASEAN Charter. In regards to the difference of the both principles, both organizations, ASEAN and European Union, are surviving and thriving into the third decade of this 21st century, which made both principles are seemingly both working successfully. Hence, it is quite interesting to see if both institutions can share the prospect and values of their respective core principles, and also many other things like sharing of culture, educational, and anything soft diplomacy. between European Union and ASEAN, which will surely develop both countries in both institutions even more. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you very much for the time, stage, and attention. Back to the host, Ms. Mabda. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Thank you. Last but not least, I would like to call a representative from the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia to share their view. Please, you may share your view briefly.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mariza Ramadhani as the representative of FPCI chapter East Java Veteran National Development University. It's honored to be able to attend this exclusive discussion event held by Habibie Center and IRSEA with a discussion on EU-ASEAN cooperation. The cooperation between Indonesia and Romania has been running for 71 years. The two bilateral cooperation continues to grow on the basis of warm mutual benefits. Although the two countries are geographically far apart, they are close to respecting in other values such as democracy, tolerance, and the rule of law. Besides that, we also have very good cooperation between the European Union and ASEAN. Romania is committed to promoting and the development of the EU and ASEAN strategic partnership. The strategy aims to promote effective multilateralism, free trade, and inclusive economic recovery. With this, we hope there will be an opportunity to explore the potential for practical cooperation between Romania and Indonesia and other fields. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've heard views from both the Romanian and Indonesian sides, which I am sure will make for interesting discussions. Now, departing from these views, it's time to proceed to presentations from the keynote speakers. As a reminder, all participants on Zoom are required to have their microphones muted, and you will be given the opportunity to raise questions during the sharing session. And participants on YouTube are more than welcome to use the chat box feature to type in your questions. The first to speak is His Excellency Minister Leonard Orban, who will speak about Romania's role in the EU and lessons learned from Romania's presidency of the Council of the EU. Minister, the time is yours.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So thank you very much for this invitation. When Ambassador Sabwika suggested me to attend this webinar, I was a little bit puzzled because I'm not a specialist in relations between EU and the Asian country, Southeast Asia. And I'm not a specialist between bilateral relationship between Romania and Indonesia. But however, I welcome very much this idea to take part in this webinar because it's a way of trying to strengthen the relationship between the two countries, to strengthen the relationship between EU and ASEAN. I would share from my experience as an expert in EU affairs, in European Union affairs. I started to work in this area in 1993. So my experience is extremely very rich. I thank you very much to Nick, who made the presentation concerning my career. What I would like to strengthen is that I had the chance to take part in the activities of some of the most important European institutions at the European level. I started to be responsible with the relationship with the European Parliament. So I know very well how the European Parliament is functioning. Then I became, as it was mentioned, the first Romanian commissioner before being deputy chief negotiator and chief negotiator with the EU. As being the first Romanian commissioner, it was an absolutely incredible experience for me to be member in the government of the EU. So in fact, the Commission is the government When I came back, I was twice presidential advisor dealing with the activity of the European Council. So the institution which is taking the decision, which is defining, let's say, the strategic lines at the European level. And also I was a minister 3 times, responsible not only with the EU affairs, but also with EU funds, which is quite a complicated activity. So after this very short presentation, let me start by saying that Romania joined the EU on 1st of January 2007. It's clearly that Romania is a deeply pro-European state. The benefits that the EU membership has brought to Romania are absolutely undeniable. The accession of Romania to the European Union was, along with the accession to NATO, one of the most important moments in our modern history. The 15 years of EU membership have greatly transformed Romania as a state, but also as a society. Romania has made significant progress, and the positive development can be observed in all areas of life. And I will just mention several aspects. The standard of living of the citizens, the upward evolution of GDP. Let me just give you 2 figures. The GDP has increased during this period 3 times, and the GDP per capita 4 times. The respect for the democratic values and principles, the free movement of persons in all its forms, more stability, and very, very important, prosperity. The economic development has generated prosperity and opportunities for all the stakeholders on the Romanian market, including small entrepreneurs or young people who have specialized in high tech, such as IT, creative industry, research. The Romanian companies also enjoy full access to the EU internal market. The Romanian citizens can freely move and study within the EU, and this is a direct effect of the EU accession. Now, and this is extremely important, Romania is part of the European decision-making process, where it can promote its national positions and interests. As an EU member state, Romania has consolidated its status at the European level. It demonstrated that it is a credible partner at European level that consistently advocates for the consolidation of the European project, for the respect of the fundamental principles and values of the European Union. Also, Romania has access to the EU financial resources for the economic development and for overcoming the gaps, mainly regarding the countries from the western part of Europe. We are net beneficiaries of the cohesion policy with direct implication for our economic development. Romania received more than 50 billion euro during this period compared to its contribution to the EU budget. Romania has also access to EU programs in the field of research, digital, or connectivity, Connecting Europe program. Romania contributed to strengthening the common capacity to respond to crisis development at European level. Thus, during the COVID pandemic, we had access to vaccines at the same time and through the same procedure as the other EU states. I think with the exception of the European Union, I don't think that in other parts of the world, such a mechanism was put into practice. In these 15 years, Romania has modernized through economic development, through the consolidation of democracy, through the improvement of its institutions and administrative capacity. Moreover, the support shown by the Romanians for the European Union is high and has remained constant over time, which unequivocally demonstrates our deep attachment to the European family, to the European values and way of life. Even though the expectations may be different, it is always important to look at what we have achieved since our EU accession and also to put things into perspective. Of course, there are still objectives to be achieved, such as the accession to the Schengen area or the accession to the Eurozone, improving the absorption rate of the European funds that we have at our disposal. A few words about Schengen area. I hope that there are good opportunities to have a positive decision of the Council of the European Union, either in December this year or at the beginning next year. Definitely, if we focus on the results, we can see tangible, concrete things we have achieved in all this year, namely the overall evolution of the Romanian society and economy. Concerning the Romanian's role and profile within the EU, as a member of the European Union, Romania has constantly strengthened its status at European level. During the 15 years of EU membership, Romania has demonstrated, as I said before, that it is a credible partner, which consistently advocated for the consolidation of the European project, for the respect of the principle on fundamental values of the European Union. Holding the presidency of the EU Council in the first semester of 2019, Romania confirmed it could successfully fulfill this mission. This has represented a particularly important moment for our country. Romania contributed with ideas, with initiative, with a constructive and determined attitude, managing to be one of the most successful presidencies in the history of the Union, with over 90 concluded legislative files that included 10 agreements on the complex long-term budget topic. Despite some factors beyond its control, such as the European elections and the Brexit process, Romania proved its capacity to add value to the European Union. These results were recognized and highly appreciated by all at the European level. This success of exercising the EU Council presidency will reshape Romania's European profile. Thus, Romania is considered as a reliable partner, has acquired a much stronger and more respected voice at the European level, and has grown as a responsible actor within the Union. Romania took an active part in the negotiation process of certain decisions that will mark the history of the European Union. It contributed to defining the future of the European Union. Romania has gained great credibility at the European level following the successful exercise of the European of the presidency of the EU Council. This must be capitalized in the near future. Romania's specific interests were adequately reflected in all the decisions taken. The Romanian presidency of the EU Council transformed risk into opportunity, acting at the same time as an honest broker that ensure a balance between the interests of all member states. Thus, Romania promoting an agenda of consensus and cohesion, essentially factors for European unity in a constantly changing international context. It contributed significantly to the strengthening of cooperation within the European Union. Definitely, Romania has demonstrated its political and administrative capacity to successfully exercise important obligations within the European Union. Romania has proven during this period its concept, organization, vision, and strategic capacity. The strategic success of the Sibiu Summit, which took place on May the 9th, the EU leaders gathered in Sibiu to discuss the future of Europe. The main tangible outcome of the meeting included the Sibiu Declaration with 10 commitments ranging from defense to solidarity to the rule of law, and a first draft of the Council's 5-year plans known as the Strategic Agenda, adopted later in June by the European Council. I would like just to share with you a few thoughts about the Sibiu Declaration. During the presidency of the European Council, I was advisor of the current president of Romania, Mr. Iohannis, and I was directly responsible with the preparation of the Sibiu Summit and mainly with the preparation of Sibiu Declaration. It is not easy at all to, let's say, to include in a document ideas and interests of all member states, because such kind of declaration is adopted by unanimity. So it's not simple at all. It was quite a challenging task for me, but however, I'm very proud that I was able to prepare a text, of course, together with our colleagues, together with the European Commission, and which was finally not only accepted, but let's say enthusiastically adopted by the European leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude my short intervention, of course, mentioning that I'm ready to answer to your questions, not only regarding the Romanian experience within the EU, but also to respond to the questions related with the bilateral relationship between Romania and Indonesia, to answer to the questions concerning the challenges we are confronted with. I said nothing about the war in Ukraine, but which created a completely different environment and which simply destroyed the European security architecture. But I'm ready to answer all these questions. Of course, let's say I'm very open now because I'm no longer an official. I'm very open to share my thoughts with you on all these aspects. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister Orban, for your presentation. Departing from his views as a practitioner, it's interesting to note that the tremendous opportunity brought by Romania's accession to the EU, and likewise how deep Romania's commitment to the EU and its values is. His points on Romania's success as the president of the European Council was also very remarkable, And I take that Romania's role as an honest broker in the EU reminds us in the Southeast Asia of Indonesia's role as well in the region. I'm sure these points would be interesting to discuss. Next, I would like to call Dr. Sofwan Albana Khoiruzad to present his views on Indonesia's role in ASEAN and expectations from the 2023 chairmanship. Dr. Sofwan, you may have the screen.
Thank you very much, Mabda, and thank you very much, His Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very great opportunity to be here, and I'm happy to share a few of my thoughts regarding Indonesia's role in ASEAN, as well as its expected role during its chairmanship for ASEAN next year, which is going to be a hard year, I guess, due to multiple factors. I'll start with asking us to remember that while we think that Indonesia's role, Indonesia's leadership in ASEAN is often taken as granted, that ASEAN is the cornerstone of Indonesia's foreign policy is often taken for granted, especially for contemporary observers or contemporary policymakers, or even the common public. It is not always like that. Indonesia's involvement in ASEAN since 1967 and its role in ASEAN is pretty much connected to what is happening at both domestic levels and at the international and regional levels. Because it is interesting, it is important to understand the context and the changing context when we are trying to understand what might happen in Indonesia's chairmanship next year. So I will start with that by looking at the context in which Indonesia's involvement in ASEAN is shaped, and how the ASEAN itself has evolved, and how then the current geopolitical tensions as well as regional challenges had created new challenges that must be tackled by Indonesia's leadership later. So I'll begin with this. If you come to East Asia, we can understand that there are two different types of East Asia. The first one is the East Asia where the Cold War is still there. The other one is the East Asia where the Cold War is often considered as a thing of the past. The East Asia where the Cold War is still there is the Northeast Asia, the East Asia, which consists of Japan, Korea, the two Koreas, two conflicting Koreas, and the China. That's why, for example, tensions remain high. We just heard a few weeks ago that the missile from North Korea is flying near Hokkaido in the part of Japan. And we should remember that actually the Korean Peninsula is technically still at war. And North, the DPRK and the ROK are actually not agreeing for an end to the Korean War itself. It is an armistice. It is an agreement to temporarily cease violence, but not ending the war itself. So technically, East Asia is still pretty much defined by the Cold War. But if we move a bit further south to Southeast Asia, the picture is, or some people argue was, is quite different, because in Southeast Asia, now what we see is the increasing economic integration, especially since the advance of the ASEAN community, which includes the 3 pillars from ASEAN political security community to ASEAN economic community to ASEAN socio-cultural community. While some tensions often occur, especially when we hold football match between Indonesia and Malaysia, right? Or between different ASEAN countries in general, situation are quite stable. Regional situation is relatively stable. But we must remember that this was not always the case. In 1960s, Indonesia, now considered as the leader of ASEAN, was involved in a conflict with its neighbor in Southeast Asia, the confrontasi, where Indonesia resists the establishment of the Malaysian Federation, which is considered as a puppet state of the Western colonial power, the British, which after the fall of the colonialism wanted to do some exit quickly. So Brexit, British exit, is always cause problem, no? Not only now, the British exit during the colonial period also create a lot of problem in India, in Indian continent, in Southeast Asia, where actually when the British Empire wanted to get out from Southeast Asia, then they collect some part of their colonies in Southeast Asia, in the Malaya, to be the Malaysian Federation, which then includes some part in Kalimantan, which is how to say, which some elements within those Kalimantan actually considering to join Indonesia, according to Sukarno's version at the time. So because there was, it was decided unilaterally by the colonial power, and there were protests from Indonesia as well as some voices inside the Malaysian Federation itself. There should be some referendum to be held in some part of Kalimantan, which is not happening because then the British decided to give the independence to Malaysia first. Feeling humiliated, feeling not consulted, and feeling threatened by the action of the colonial power, the power which has the garden, not the jungle. Anyway, the Sukarno's governance declare its protest. It's get out from it sends a note of protest to the United Nations. And when it was rejected, Indonesia get out from the United Nations and establish its own new emerging forces conference, the CONEFO, the conference of the new emerging forces. Of course, a lot of interpretations for this, but what I would like to say is that the stable situation in Southeast Asia, which we see now and we often see as taken for granted, is actually should not be seen as taken for granted. It is something that is happening due to particular historical development shaped by the global, regional, and domestic context. ASEAN establishment was very much connected to that change from the conflictual situation during the Cold War into a more stable region. That is why, despite many criticisms towards ASEAN, many say ASEAN is too many ceremonies, too many meetings, but no results. But if we see since the establishment of ASEAN, and especially after 1980s and 1990s, ASEAN has played a very significant role in maintaining the stability of the region. So despite its limitations, it is crucial, it is important, it is an important entity which has been significantly change the Southeast Asian region from a conflictual one into a more stable one. So after the confrontasi, and even ASEAN was not the first institution was tried to be established for maintaining stability in the region. There was Mafilindo, there was Sieto, but all of them were failed. Why ASEAN was successful? Because of the change in the domestic politics in different ASEAN countries, different Southeast Asian countries in 1960s. Now we are in the month of October, and so it's not so far from the 30 September or 1 October incidents, depends on which side you are on. But whatever the truth is, it created significant change in Indonesian politics. And Indonesia, who was confrontative towards its neighbor, considered as threat, now trying to convince that we are a peaceful actor and we must engage with the global community, because Indonesia then shift also its economic orientation from trying to build its own national economy to be more liberal and opening to foreign investment. So one of the first change in Indonesia's policy after the 1965 political crisis was the establishment of the law on foreign investment. So it is pretty much related to that. So Indonesia needs to get foreign investment. Indonesia needs to convince the world community that Indonesia is not a rogue actor. It is no longer a threat to its neighbors. So Indonesia then use ASEAN, the institution, to show that, to show its change of orientation in foreign policy, and at the same time also connected to the fact that many Southeast Asian countries also feel the importance of protecting itself from the subversive movements, which is often mean the communist movements in different ASEAN countries, in Philippines, in Malaysia, and other Southeast Asian countries at the time. So that is why then we also introduced the non-interference and non-intervention principles, because it is connected to the agreement for not supporting subversive movements in different Southeast Asian countries. So after the establishment of ASEAN, the regimes in Southeast Asia were aligning their foreign and domestic policy and putting economic stability, economic development as priority. We may have differences, but it is important to prioritize economic development. And to do economic development, to enable economic development, political stability is important. That is why, that is the basic premise of ASEAN. So we need to do development. But to do development, we need a stable region. And because of that, then ASEAN starts with the Declaration of Zone of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality in 1961. And then in 1966, ASEAN established its secretariat in Jakarta. At the same year, 1967, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation is agreed. There's also the Treaty of ASEAN Concord. So during that period, ASEAN mainly acts as an association to maintain stability in the region, trying to navigate the tensions of the Cold War, including during the conflict in Indochina, in which ASEAN played a very important role in supporting UN effort for establishing peace in Cambodia. So ASEAN and Indonesia is actively involved in the Cambodian peace process, including the Jakarta informal meetings in 1988, and then until 1993, where the peace settlement was then happening. So after 1990s, the global and regional situation changed. The Cold War situation is pretty much changed, and now the driver for economic regionalism from security turned into economic one. It was started with Japanese transnational companies going out to develop its production base in Southeast Asia after the Second World War, because it was not allowed to go to China before the rapprochement by the United States. So they go to Southeast Asia and develop their production base in Southeast Asia. Later, when China when the US changed its stance towards China with the development of the Cold War, the rapprochement with China, the ping-pong diplomacy thing, then the US, then the economic flow was involving China. So it's now Japan, China, Southeast Asia, and the United States. As China grows as an economic power, it also try to develop economic connection and production base to Southeast Asia too. So the need for regional integration, because these companies wanted to have their competitive advantage by spreading their production processes in different parts of Southeast Asia, which has cheap labor and closer to the market, then creates the urgency for regional integration. That is why one of the leading institutions for regional integration in Southeast Asia and in East Asia is AREA, which was pretty much sponsored by Japan, because it was connected to Japanese expansion for production base in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asian leaders looking at this development see this actually also as a good thing, which will enable their development further. So then we see the development of the AFTA, ASEAN Free Trade agreements. However, during 1990s, another regional imagination appeared, which is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. There was a debate within Southeast Asia between those who advocate for Asia for Asians, such as Mahathir Mohamad, And those who wanted Asia to be more connected with its Pacific counterparts, which argue for the Asia-Pacific economic cooperation, because it was the end of the Cold War and everyone wants to be close to the United States, and Japan and Australia was very active during the process, powerful during the time. So Mahathir's idea was less influential, and APEC was established. But later, the idea of East Asian economic integration was later revived after the Asian crisis in 1997, 1998. The Asian crisis, 1997, 1998, reminds East Asian leaders that their Pacific counterparts are not always on their side when crisis is happening. So in Indonesia, for example, the policymakers was very disappointed with IMF's response towards the crisis. So Indonesia needs liquidity fast, quickly, yeah, but IMF asked for structural adjustments with long negotiations, which the aid was too long, too late, and often create negative impacts. Because of that disappointment, many East Asian leaders turn back into the idea of Asia for Asians. That is why after the crisis, we see the revival of the idea of East Asian integration, which then translated into ASEAN +3, the East Asian community, and including the Asian community later. So there are contexts which shape our regional imagination, and there are also domestic contexts which made Indonesia put ASEAN at the cornerstone of its foreign policy. It is not something that is taken for granted. It is not given. It is conditioned by the global, regional, and domestic or national dynamics. By understanding that, it is important to then trying to understand what are the global, regional, and national dynamics, which would be influential in shaping Indonesia's role during its chairmanship next year. At the global level, of course, as you in Europe, of course, realize this more than others, what is happening in Ukraine now is, of course, having a systemic effect throughout the world. Not only it changed the expectations and calculations of different players in the region, including the great powers, the US, China, so of course having different lessons from Ukraine, from the Russia's invasion in Ukraine. So we see increasing distrust and increasing tensions also in the region. It also has probably has some stabilizing effect, as China then maybe rethinking its plan to, for example, annex Taiwan, because Ukraine showed that military might not be the only deciding factor. So a determined and small but determined force like Ukraine can actually create a lot of problems for bigger and more militarily, materialistically stronger force like Russia. So China may take lessons for that and create disincentive for recklessly attacking Taiwan. But at the same time, it also creates how to say distrust towards international institutions, which is actually not working effectively to constrain such events, it will also create some more realpolitik orientation in the region, which actors then think that it is important to ensure your survival and not relying on international institutions, including ASEAN. That is why a lot of thinking about the post-ASEAN foreign policy, although I don't think it is popular in Indonesia right now. There is also a worry that the global context, which will also lead to the possibility of nuclear proliferation, which has been prevented through ZOPFAN in Southeast Asia and the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, due to the increasing geopolitical tension. One lesson from Russia, Ukraine, the not so good lesson is that probably if you have nuclear, people will not do anything reckless to you. So North Korea is doing reckless things, but nobody is trying to invade North Korea right now because it has nuclear. So maybe by that creates incentives in a world of increasing geopolitical tension for nuclear proliferation. Now there's already new push from some policy circles in the United States, for example, for allowing Japan or Korea, South Korea, to have their own nuclear. AUKUS is already opening the possibility of like nuclear submarines in the area, which will, of course, affecting Southeast Asia. So there is a global geopolitical context which made it more challenging for ASEAN to effectively becoming the rule keeper in the region because of these forces, these disintegrating forces. I think the other challenge, the regional dynamics that need to be tackled, apart from the impact of the geopolitical tension in Ukraine, is of course the great power rivalry between China and the US, which is increasingly open, and in that context, the Indo-Pacific concept is a very important aspect of it. I will go back to that later, but then let's go to the regional context. The regional context is then there are challenges that still remains. With one is the Myanmar issue. Myanmar is a very important issue, which shows the difficulty of ASEAN in dealing with it. A lot of push for ASEAN to play more an effective role in solving the Myanmar crisis, but ASEAN is still stuck with the 5 principles, with which actually is not really contributing to the betterment of the situation right now. So a lot of pressures to be more proactive, including in changing some parts of the ASEAN Charter, like the possibility of suspending members when they do some humanitarian crime, like what is happening in Myanmar. And then I think the domestic situation also matters. Indonesia just finished the G20 presidentship, and of course, Indonesia want to continue the momentum from the G20 presidentship, not only at the international level, but more also for the domestic audience, to show that Indonesia is playing a leadership role in the world. We expect that Indonesia will try to make its chairmanship to have some historical achievements. So based on those three things, I think there will be some priorities that would be put in the table by Indonesia. First is, of course, trying to ensure, trying to further cement the ASEAN centrality in navigating the increasing geopolitical tension, including avoiding the nuclear proliferation. So I think it is then important to translate the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific further. So I think there will be efforts or initiative to push ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific further, not only as an outlook, but what actually ASEAN wants with this. How is it connected to the existing initiatives by China, like the Global Development or Global Security Initiative, or with the US, like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, how the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific can be the bridge, can be the connector between these competing geopolitical visions and geoeconomic visions, and to ensure ASEAN centrality in that. So I think that would be one priority. Another priority, I think the second would be related to Myanmar. There will be efforts to prove that ASEAN is still an important actor in the region and can significantly play a role in maintaining the stability in the region by trying to push for more effective solution for Myanmar. And third, I think the code of conduct negotiation will also be on the table in the South China Sea, the COC negotiation. Those three will be among the main priorities of the discussion in Indonesia's leadership during its chairmanship. Apart from that, of course, economic integration, the agenda for development will also continue to be in the priority. So I think with that, I will end my presentation. Hopefully it provides us with a general picture on what kind of agenda or issue Indonesia will focus on during its chairmanship next year. Looking forward for the discussion. Thank you very much, and I return this to Mabda.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Sofan, for your presentation. He began with reminding us to not take ASEAN, its history, its present political stability, and Southeast Asia as a regional construct for granted. And that also applies to Indonesia's role and interest in ASEAN. Dr. Hoiruzad also pointed out that we might witness interesting challenges in 2023, including geopolitical tensions, nuclear proliferation, great power rivalry, as well as regional challenges such as the Myanmar crisis, the South China Sea, along with economic integration. Noting that both speakers emphasized the deep commitment of Romania and Indonesia towards the EU and ASEAN, respectively, I would like to invite His Excellency Mr. Orban to respond to Dr. Hoiruzad's remark. Mr. Orban, could you please briefly, for probably 1 minute, share your view on whether Romania and Indonesia could elevate their bilateral relations at partnership level?
No doubt. No doubt, I think that there are good perspectives to, let's say, to have a development, strengthening of the bilateral relationship. So there are two pillars. The first one is the pillar between the EU and ASEAN. I mentioned during my speech that Romania is following very closely the developments of the EU and also is influencing this development. And I saw that there are very positive development of the relationship between EU and ASEAN. The fact that an aviation agreement was signed this week, several days ago, it's an extremely important signal of strengthening the relationship, people to people, not only an economic relationship, not only political, but people to people, because there will be facilities which will allow more than 1.1 billion citizens, both in EU and ASEAN countries, to, let's say, to have closer contact. And this is extremely, extremely important. So I mentioned an ASEAN. Now, as I'm aware, there are negotiations on the free trade agreement between EU and ASEAN. Of course, we are not in a very advanced stage for the adoption of such kind of document, but however, negotiations are advancing. This will represent a significant development in strengthening the relationship between EU and ASEAN. And on bilateral relationship, already I read very carefully what our president, Romanian president, mentioned about the development of the relationship with the countries in this area. There are very positive signals delivered by directly the Romanian president, who is, let's say, the person who decide on what kind of external policy Romania has. And I think that it's there are very good opportunity to have developments from this point of view. And also events like the event of today are helping very much in, let's say, in knowing each other better, because it's we are living in different continents with different challenges, with different perspectives, with sometimes different interests, but however we can, let's say, stay together, and we can cooperate, and we can develop, let's say, better relationships. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency. Now turning to Dr. Horizat, could you please assess whether there are possibilities of Romania and Indonesia to elevate their bilateral relations as partners? Could you please briefly share your views in roughly 1 minute?
Yeah, yes, thank you very much, Mabda. I think both bilateral relations between Indonesia and Romania, as well as a stronger relationship between EU and ASEAN would be an important step forward, especially in a world where geopolitical tensions are increasing and the global economic recession is looming. I think it is important to maintain the cooperation between countries and strengthen them to enable us to find the possibility of cooperation. So I do agree with the assessments that it is important to pursue further cooperation. However, I do think that there are things that need to be discussed further. For example, there are issues about the palm oil, which has been a very important issue in the relationship between Indonesia and European Union. Indonesia is now bringing the renewable energy directives to the WTO, which is still not concluded due to the situation in the WTO itself. But this remain an important aspect in the relationship between Indonesia and Europe, including probably Romania. And I think there are a lot of potential for collaboration between Indonesia and Romania, as Indonesia is trying to further develop its position in the global supply chain, and the importance of diversifying its involvement in the global and regional supply chain. If we look at the regional and global supply chain right now, it's pretty much dependent on China. So it is a more diverse economic relations, including trade, investment, would give Indonesia stronger resilience in not only ensuring a stable and resilient economic development, but also protecting economic development from geopolitical shocks, as well as from sudden shocks like the pandemics. So it is important to diversify economic relations. It is important to diversify investment and trading partners. And because of that, I do believe that it is in the interest of Indonesia, as well as in the interest of ASEAN and the interest of EU and Romania alike, to deepen and strengthen partnership, including the economy. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hiruzad. I personally see that both responses point to an optimistic outlook for Indonesia and Romania bilateral relations and regional engagements, which I believe that it will serve as an interesting point of observation for future developments. Now we'll proceed with the sharing session. For each round, I will take 2 to 3 questions, comments, or responses from Zoom, and also one from YouTube. Participants on Zoom may use the raise hand feature and have their cameras turned on. And participants on YouTube are more than welcome to use the chat box feature. Now I will take 3 questions from Zoom. If there's anyone who would like to raise any points, opinions, or questions, you may use the raise hand feature. I already see 2 hands raised here. Is there anyone else? Okay, I will take 2 questions, first from Anas and the second one from Dr. Jika. Please, Anas, you may start your, you may state your question.
Okay, thank you very much for Ms. Mabda for the opportunity, and thank you for the presentation, My Excellency Minister Leonard Orban and Mr. Sofwan. My name is Anas. I'm doctorate program of School of Strategic and Global Studies, University of Indonesia. It's so fascinating to observe the discussion of the presenters, My Excellency Minister Leonard Orban. In my point of view, if saying geographically, Romania is one of the big countries in Eastern Europe and contiguous directly with Ukraine. However, the Russian-Ukraine conflict has given the impact right now, not only the 2 countries in Europe, but also countries in Asia, including Southeast Asia. In this case, the excesses of the Russia-Ukraine conflict had an impact on increasing refugees from Ukraine to other countries. And related to this, my question is, how's Romania strategy in dealing with this problem? especially in the framework of implementing this SDGs 2030 Romania. It's the first one. And the second one, my question also related to SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. How are the innovation introduced by Romania as a strategy to deal with SDGs 2030, especially in terms of energy security and sustainable human development? Whether any results have been achieved within the framework of regional relations, and in your point of view, how big are the opportunities for cooperation between countries in European Union, including Romania, of course, and with ASEAN, especially Indonesia, to building sustainable human resources? I think that's all. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Back to the Ms. Mabda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anas, for your question. Now I will take the second question from Dr. Jika, please.
Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing also students' questions, but until then, especially since our students' generation is very much concerned with environmental issues, and since the SDGs have been mentioned already, and since both the European Union and the ASEAN are ultimately also regional intergovernmental organizations, and since the European Union, for instance, through its financial arm, the European Investment Bank no longer funds any project that has a negative environmental impact, I was wondering to what extent there is a similar debate currently in ASEAN about such restrictions on business and trade when it comes to environmental impact, and to what extent EU and ASEAN could collaborate on that, especially given the already shared interest in environmental issues within the framework of the SDGs agendas. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your question. Next, I will take the question from Mr. Imade Agus Yugiswara, please. Sorry, I think you still have your microphone muted. Okay,
check.
Great. Yeah.
Audible? Okay. Firstly, I want to introduce myself that I forgot to do that before. I am Imade Agus Yugiswara, doctoral candidate in University of Indonesia, from the School of Strategic and Global. That Mrs. Hani is one of my teacher that gives me a lot of things to the inside of me. And I have two main questions, and one your point of view about G20. The first one is post-COVID-19 and the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. As a part of European Union and key actor in that superb organization, what would Romania able to conduct to strengthening relation to ASEAN, especially Indonesia, in terms of social culture, political, and security? And the second one is I need to emphasize about Mr. Sofian explanation about globalization and the crisis in Europe, economic crisis in Europe, even the energy crisis in Europe. But in 2021, Indonesia and Romania have a good trade that is about $146 million in trade area. But in 2022, there are obstacles that a global recession looming, that crisis, economic crisis and energy crisis that Mr. Sofian mentioned. And I don't want you to explain about that problem, but can you explain me about what is the opportunity with those problems to maintain the trade value between two countries, and even how to increase it? That's the second question. And the third question is about the G20 presidency that Indonesia will be held in November this year. So the political inside of the G20 is a bit hidden because of the war in Russia and Ukraine. USA emphasized that they don't want to attend the G20 if, in the case, Russia will attend. And what is your opinion about that? And how could we can strong together and recover together if we involve the political point of view to the economic sector, because G20 is economic theme, not the politics. Thank you. That's all. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Mr. Made. Now I would like to give the chance to Minister Orban to address some of the questions. I have noted that first, Mr. Anas, which I think is quite relevant with your experience, he asked how has Romania's strategy to address refugee crisis in Ukraine, especially through the lens of SDGs? What innovations at the national and regional levels were introduced by Romania to achieve SDGs, especially with respect to renewable energy? And I have also noted another relevant question from Mr. Made, which was with COVID-19 and the conflict in Ukraine, what strategies could Romania employ to strengthen partnership in ASEAN? I think those questions could be addressed by Minister Orban. Minister, please.
Thank you very much for these questions. Are very say important questions addressed to the Romanian, let's say, partners. Firstly, concerning the war in Ukraine, it's very clear that. Firstly, I would like to explain you the psychology in Europe, because say we all know how complicated is the situation in Asia, in South Asia, but not only. There were it was mentioned that there is still the atmosphere of Cold War, not only between South Korea and North Korea, but also huge tensions between different other stakeholders. Okay, in Europe it was different. Before this war, it was different. There were two world wars, which had started in Europe, and after this war, there was a decision to try to do everything possible in order to avoid further wars in Europe. And one of these ideas was, one of these, let's say, initiative was related with the creation of the European community at that time. Initially, there were 6 member states, only from the western part of Europe, but now there are 27, there were 28, but with the Brexit, the UK left the EU. Okay, so it's almost the whole continent, which is part of the EU. And more, the focus on EU was on prosperity rather on security. Why? Because more and more the leaders had thought that there will be no wars on the European continent. Also with the let's say with the very extremely important conference in Helsinki in 1975, when the borders were recognized by all the European countries. Okay, then the possibility of having a war in Europe was thought by, let's say, the huge majority of the European leaders was thought that it was simply eliminated. And the shock when on 24th of February this year, when Russia attacked Ukraine violently, the shock of the European leader was absolutely huge. And everything what happened before was, how to say, was put into question. And more, it is an unanimity at the level of all European leaders that on top, we have to ensure security and only afterwards prosperity. So security is on top, and afterwards prosperity will come. Okay, many things happened in these last months. For example, it was for me absolutely incredible that at the level of the European Union, unanimity was reached in order to have eight packages of sanctions for Russia. And to adopt a package of sanctions, unanimity is required. So despite the fact that before the 24th of February, the EU member states were not able to have a strategy concerning Russia, a real strategy, not just simply words, because the interests of different member states were so different. Afterwards, so the member states were, let's say, were able to take very important decisions. Of course, Romania was part of this effort. You asked me, Mr. Anas, what is the strategy of Romania concerning Ukraine? The strategy of Romania is, it's focused on the efforts of two very important organizations: NATO, which provides security on the European continent, and the fact that we are a member of NATO is one of the most important achievements for us, because this guarantees our security. We have a long history of conflicts with Russia, a very long history of conflicts with Russia. In the last 2 centuries, Romania was invaded by Russia more than 10 times. So you know that how sensitive is this issue for us. So to have a guarantee, security guarantees is essential. So we are acting, having this in mind, we are acting in order to strengthen the efforts of NATO and the EU to deal with the conflict in the war in Ukraine, to fully support Ukraine, because let's be very honest. If Ukraine will fail, Russia will have, not on short term, but a medium and long term, no hesitation to attack even a NATO country or an EU country. So it is essential to support, to fully support Ukraine, not only from a humanitarian point of view, or from an economic point of view, but also from a military point of view. So this is our strategy. Of course, also I mentioned humanitarian point of view. More than 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees across Romania. Some are staying in Romania, but many, let's say, left Romania and went to other member states. We are taking care about these refugees. On the other hand, we are trying to help, let's say, Ukraine as much as possible from different point of view. We are collecting support, different support provided by EU member state, by NATO member state, and distributing to Ukraine. In terms of cereals, in terms of grains, we ensure the transfer from Ukraine of grains to the different parts of the world, not only to Africa, but also to Asia and other parts, because it's when Ukraine has started, we all know that it's the problem with the grains, it's very, very big, and it's creating huge difficulties in different countries, for example, in Africa. So we are providing substantial help. So to conclude, it was a bilateral help provided by Romania, but it was mainly a joint effort made by Romania together with other EU member states and NATO member states to fully support Ukraine, not to lose this war, and finally to win this war. Concerning the other question regarding to sustainable development, regarding the, let's say, the efforts which are taken by Romania in order to combat climate change and so on. Also here, you are aware that many developments happen within the EU. There are proposals made by the European Commission, which are now on the ongoing negotiations, to, let's say, to adapt, to transform not only the European economy, but our entire, the whole way of behavior in order to be able to protect better, to fight better to the climate change. There is the very famous proposal called Fit for 55. What does this mean? It means that by 2030, the European Union has the clear objective of reducing the CO2 emission with 55% compared with the level in 90s. It's a huge reduction, and this influences every part of our life, starting from the transport sector, what kind of car we'll use. No longer there will be, let's say, this is a decision which was taken, but of course it could be revised. So, for example, by 2035, the European car producers will no longer, let's say, sell cars which are using, let's say, solid fuels. So the only electric cars or hydrogen cars will be able to be sold starting by 2035. But there are many other issues related with housing, heating, with renewable energy. There is a very tough discussion about what kind of type of energy can be used in the following period. Okay, Mr. Gica and Mrs. Gica mentioned that there are some decisions taken by the European Union. One of the decisions is that natural gas and nuclear gas who are considered to be, let's say, transitional sources of energy. Okay, this decision, which was taken recently, is contested by some member states, especially regarding the nuclear energy. There are some countries who are strongly against the use of nuclear energy, like Austria, Luxembourg, but also Germany was in the past, but now because of the war, because of the situation in Germany, they decided to postpone the shutting down for all their nuclear plants. So it's such a detailed plan, which is not only the Romanian strategy, it's a strategy of the Union. So it's so detailed, which will imply significant changes, as I said, in all sphere of our life. Okay, and the answer concerning the security in the context of the Ukraine war and how this can develop the relationship between Romania and Indonesia, EU and ASEAN. It's very clear that, as I said, the European security architecture was simply destroyed by Russia. So we are in a completely different new situation. It's where we have to change significantly our approach. I would like to mention to you that well before the war started in Ukraine, Romania has decided to allocate significantly more in terms of defense. So at least 2% of the GDP was allocated starting from 2017 in Romania in order to consolidate the capacity of the Romanian army to be, let's say, to fight. What is happening now is that this approach was shared not only by Romania and by the countries in the region. I'm talking about Poland, I'm talking about Nordic countries, and so on and so on. The countries from Central and Eastern Europe. But now also the countries who were very reluctant in terms of, let's say, investing more in defending their, let's say, their partners and defending by themselves. Okay, it's shared by also many other countries. And I will give you just one example. I'm coming back to Germany. Germany, who from the historical reasons was very reluctant in investing more in defense. It was at the beginning, immediately after the war had started in Ukraine, the Chancellor Scholz delivered a very famous and a historical speech in the Bundestag, in the German parliament. And he said something like this: we have to invest significantly more in defense because we have to ensure the security not only of our partners, but also our security. And the fact that Germany decided to invest 2%, at least 2% in the following year in the defense and security issue, it's a major shift for Europe, which no doubt will influence not only the capacity of NATO to be, let's say, to be efficient, but also will develop a European component within NATO. Let's be very clear that there will be a full coordination between NATO and the developments in security and defense policy at the European level between these two organizations. So this will significantly influence how these areas will look like. So from this point of view, huge, every crisis has also opportunities. And one of these opportunities has the huge opportunities will come after this decision to invest more, to be more efficient in defense and security, to be more concrete. Let's say cooperation on defense and security areas will have to be developed significantly. So on this area, it's a huge potential to, let's say, to develop also the relationship between EU and ASEAN, between Romania and Indonesia. So it's a huge opportunity. I will stop here, but of course many things can be said.
Thank you, Minister. Next, I will turn to Dr. Sofwan to answer a few questions that I think would match with your expertise. The first one would be from Dr. Gika. What are the debates on environmental impacts like in projects undertaken in ASEAN, as well as bearing in mind the possibility of recession, what are the opportunities of maintaining or improving the trade value between Indonesia and Romania? Dr. Khairuzzad, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. On the question on the environment, first of all, it is important to again remember that environmental issue is not an isolated issue. It is connected to other aspects and other dimensions as well. So ASEAN has a lot of programs related to environment, but let me say this, most of them are how to say, they are good, but they are not becoming the main driver of environmental situation in Southeast Asia. Yeah, even the huge issue of haze, which create tensions between Indonesia and Malaysia, as well as Singapore. And the Singapore airport was closed during 2015 haze incidents because of the fire connected to the deforestation. So I think it is important to acknowledge that in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, environment is still not in the main priority. It is, of course, good to always mention it performatively that we care about the environment, yeah, but I have to say honestly that environment remains not a priority at ASEAN policy. Why? Because it is very much connected to the political economic structure in Southeast Asian countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, which is very much reliant on extractive industries. And when you are reliant on extractive industries like mining or agriculture, the expansion of that extractive industry is of course connected to a lot of environmental impacts. So as long as the Southeast Asian countries are relying on extractive industries, it is very difficult to mainstream environmental policies at the forefront. Yeah, we see a lot of, if we look at the ASEAN programs on environment, we see like programs like the SDG Frontrunner Cities Program, Eco Schools, Youth Eco Champion. I mean, things that are nice, you know, and it's good, but not addressing the real problem of environment and the issue. Having said that, it is also important to also look at the complexity because environment issue often involve trade-offs between different aspects, including economy and livelihood. I mean, even Europe, even Germany, the Germany coal I mean, the electricity generator from coal who was shut down for achieving the climate commitment was restarted again in Germany, right? Recently, Uniper, because of the situation in Ukraine. So there is always trade-offs between different things. And for Germany, for example, it is survival to have electricity now. But for many people in Indonesia and Malaysia and Cambodia, for example, these trade-offs occur in many ways, and sometimes that creates complexity and difficulty to balance between the environment and the livelihood. But we also at the same time need to understand the unequal power relations within the country, within Indonesia, for example, where this extractive industry are controlled by some elites, sometimes using the name of the poor people, but actually only benefiting a few. So we need to tackle this inequality of power too. But we also need to aware about the inequality and bias between Indonesia and developing countries and Europe, or including EU. I mean, as illustrated by the recent controversial statement about the garden and the jungle, we in Southeast Asia and Indonesian policymakers often feel patronized by the European approach on environment, because sometimes when Europe pursuing environmental policies, it is unilaterally deciding things without trying to listen and understand the complexity from the perspectives of ASEAN or from Indonesia, like in the issue of the renewable energy directives too, as well as on the issue of deforestation import, which often criticized by many in Indonesia. I myself actually, how to say, see the importance of, for example, putting control on deforestation. Yes, that's true. But it is also important to understand this, how to say, this unequal relationship within the country and between the countries to make a more inclusive and effective policy. So what if the question is about how to make a more effective collaboration, I think it could start by pursuing a more inclusive policy related to environment. We need to, for example, not only when, for example, deciding environmental policies which will have effect to other parts of the world, it is also important to involve, for example, farmers or smallholders in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, at least to be listened to. So I think inclusive environmental cooperation, which is sensitive to the complexity of the issue, is important. I'm all for stopping the climate catastrophe. I'm all for environmental protection, but it's important to understand that environmental issue is embedded in the larger political economic structure, and thus we must be sensitive of the unequal relationship between countries as well as within countries. So inclusive policy making process is important in this regard, and hopefully we can effectively cooperate in that. Yeah, I think that's all my response. Yeah, hope for more productive cooperation in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Hoyruzad. Due to the time limit, we are sorry that we are unable to take more responses, but I believe that the previous discussion could offer new perspectives from everyone from both countries. The Habibie Center and IRSEA would like to extend their gratitude to His Excellency Minister Leonard Orban, Sofwan Albanahurizat PhD, and all of the institutions present on this occasion for their support for and participation in today's webinar. Before we end our discussion today, I would like to call all participants to turn their cameras on for documentation purposes, which will be taken after the closing remark. I would also like to call each representative from IRSEA and the Habibie Center to give a short closing remark. To His Excellency Ambassador George Salvica, the President of IRSEA, the time is yours, please, sir.
Thank you very much. You know, there are always two ways of speaking, through your mind and through your heart. I think that you have to come to the conclusion at the end of what I would like to say here, if I am speaking through my mind or through my heart. So, bagaimana saya mesti mulai kata-kata selamat? Saya kira bahwa saya mau ingat pidato-pidato daripada Presiden Soekarno. Dia mulai sedemikian. Saudara-saudara sekalian, kita berkumpul di sini untuk membicarakan beberapa hal-hal yang penting sekali untuk negara kita. So in translation, I said that I would like to imitate, if it's possible, the first president of the Republic of Indonesia, how he started his speech. And he said, comrades, we gathered here to discuss very important matters for our country. So, coming to us, we also gathered here to discuss very important matters. And I would say that what our keynote speaker said, what the interest of the students, it proves that really the project that we undertaken with the Habibie Center, our partner, was really useful. And I think that all of us have many things to learn from the illuminating presentations. I would say convincing. I would like to say that even as far as the European Union, from our minister, you know, he convinced me even more to be a pro-European. Not that I was against, but he was very convincing. Now, I would also like to thank really everybody who was involved in this project, starting from the students, professors, keynote speakers, the moderator, who did a very good job, and we have to think about some other projects, because this is the way, as it was emphasized here, people-to-people connection. And students, they are the generation to implement the future development of the relations between our two countries, as well as between European Union and ASEAN. That's why I would like to pinpoint, if you allow me, two, three points here. First of all is that when ASEAN was created in 1967, in Europe, but I'm speaking within the socialist countries, there was the impression that ASEAN, it's another Seattle. I mean, it's a military organization. Well, my country was the only one which from the very beginning had an official position saying that ASEAN, it's a pure economic regional cooperation organization. And if you excuse my lack of modesty, the draft proposal for such a position belonged to me. And I was just entered into I just joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, the second is that in 2003, during the visit of President Sukarnoputri to Romania, there was signed a presidential declaration which is drawing the road for the future development of our relations. That's why I think that both Romania and Indonesia, they have a stronger voice in ASEAN as well as in European Union based on a very strong bilateral relation. That's why, honestly speaking, I am very much in favor, and I'll continue to promote the necessity of elevating the stage of our bilateral relations to the partnership level. Now, allow me to read to you a message that I got for this event. Dear Ambassador George Savoyka, dear students, I really appreciate the initiative of organizing the first bilateral webinar organized by the two highly prestigious institutions from Romania and Indonesia, namely IRSEA and the Habibie Center. This event held under the title Romania event. This event held under the title Romania in the EU, Indonesia and ASEAN represents another brick laid in the consolidation of bilateral relations between our countries, relations that have already completed 72 years. I appreciate the dedication of Ambassador Savoyka during all these years as a good friend of Indonesia, and the openness of the Habibie Center board for the implementation of the collaboration partnership agreement signed a short time ago. On this occasion, marking the 55th anniversary of ASEAN. I would like to take this opportunity to greet the students present at the event and to assure them that they made a good choice to participate because they will have a special meeting enriched with information and opinions regarding the realities of the two countries and the roles played by both Indonesia and Romania in the regional organizations. Once again, to all involved, I wish you success and assure you of my special consideration. On a special note, I invite Romanian students to give a chance to the scholarships offered by the Indonesian government and use the opportunity to live in the archipelago for a while to discover the smiles of the inhabitants and the cultural richness of my country. A friend of Romania, besar ambassador of Indonesia to Romania, Pak M. Amhar Azad. I think that it is more than a vote of thanks. It opened an opportunity for the Romanian students to get some scholarships for Indonesia.
Thank you,
I don't
Ambassador.
know Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I know that I have to be short, unfortunately. Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, Ambassador Salvika. Next, I would like to call Dr. Hassan Ansori to provide his short concluding remark. Dr. Hassan Ansori is the Executive Director of the Habibie Center. Sir, you may have the screen. Dr. Ansori, sir, you still have your microphone muted.
Thank you, Magda. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, selamat sore semuanya. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, professors, students, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Habibie Center, let me at the very outset express my sincere thanks and appreciation to the ASEAN for collaborating with the Habibie Center for such an important webinar. The Habibie Center that is established in 1999 and its establishment is generally driven by President Habibie's dream, values, and ideals on building a modern and democratic society, consistently intend to establish a democratic society that recognize and respect and promote human rights. May the cherished friendship between our two organizations continue into the foreseeable future with more diverse and fruitful programs and activities, and importantly contribute to building stronger and more mutually beneficial relationship between Indonesia and Romania, and broadly between ASEAN and EU. I would like to thank our speakers, Professor Leonard Orban, and my colleague, Dr. Sofyan Albana, for providing insight presentation. Lastly, to end, I would like also to thank the Indonesian and Romanian students, the audience, mostly on the Habibie Center YouTube as well, for actively participating in the fruitful discussion. I hope that this webinar would be beneficial, would benefit relevant parties and stakeholders, including policymakers, practitioners, academics, students, and that by ending this webinar, I hope that we will have a satisfied understanding and more knowledge on the roles of Indonesia and Romania in their respective regions and the globe, especially in promoting democracy and human rights in broader spectrum and in diverse form of expression. Finally, I believe that the webinar will be a good step toward bridging people-to-people connectivity between ASEAN and European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ansari, for your closing remark. And that concludes our discussion today. Again, thank you for participants joining from Zoom and YouTube. And now I would like to start to document our activity today. So for all of the participants, please have your cameras turned on, and we will start to screenshot the screen on Zoom. And you can follow my countdown. Now for the first page, we have 4 pages, so we'll do the countdown 4 times. For the first page, we will start in 3, 2, 1. Excellent. We proceed to the second page. Please have your cameras turned on. Now let's begin. 3, 2, 1. Perfect. We also have the third page. Please have your cameras turned on. 3, 2, 1. And lastly, for the last page, please still have your cameras turned on. 3, 2, 1. That's perfect. Okay, that concludes our webinar today. You can find more about the Habibie Center and IRSEA on our official Instagram and LinkedIn accounts, as well as our websites. It has been a pleasure moderating today's webinar. Thank you, and see you on another webinar.